I want to make a video here on the M1917 rifle, which is one of the forgotten service rifles in the Canadian military. A lot of Canadian military collectors and if people outside of the Dominion collect um, rifles, they usually tend to focus on Lee Enfields and Snider rifles and things like that of British make. And there's one rifle I think gets constantly looked over, and some people don't even know that it was issued as a regular rifle to Canadian troops. And to start off with, in the First World War, the British developed the P14, which is a 303 caliber, uses a Mauser action, and it was supposed to replace the Lee Enfield at that time. But when World War I came around, they had limited production of it, but they canceled the project and it was never fully adopted. Um, the Americans were the primary maker of the P14, and when America finally got into the war, they needed more service rifles. Their service rifle was the 1903 Springfield, but it took a long time to produce and they didn't have near enough. So they took over production of the P14s and they converted them to 30-06 caliber for the American standard cartridge. And at this point, I believe when the Americans entered the war, I don't know if it's true for the whole war, but when they entered the war, the P17 was the most numerous rifle they had in service at that time. I believe around late 1917, 1918. And after the war ended, they had tons of stock of these rifles. And this is where the Canadian story of these rifles starts. Because after World War I and before World War II, we were sort of short of arms, and we had sort of a mixed match of arms from the war. Ross rifles, Mark 1s and 2s, and then there was hope of making the Lee Enfield Mark 6, which we now know as the number 4 Lee Enfield. And so there was no real hurry to adopt anything. The Americans even offered us 150,000 of these P19 or M1917 30-06 rifles, but it was turned down because we didn't think we would need them. But then fast forward to the beginning of World War II, when we were still short of arms. I'm not sure if it was an American who approached or if it was a Canadian delegate who reminded the government that the Americans still had these rifles. So we were able in 1939, I believe it was 1939, that we procured about 80,000 of these 30-06 M1917 rifles, and they became a training rifle, and also they would have been our mobilization rifle because we had more of them than we had of anything else. And so from 1939 to about the start of 1942, they were the main rifle that we had the most number of in Canadian service. And there was, I believe, a second order that were just leased to us for 20,000 additional rifles. So we had about 100,000 of these in service between 1939 and till the adoption of the Lee Enfield. I believe at late 1941 or 42 is when we officially adopted the number 4 rifle. And then at that point, these rifles were sold as surplus to like the British Home Guard, and I'm not sure if the Dutch got any maybe after the war, but they were sort of just distributed around after we got the adoption of the number 4 and production started. But this rifle, it's pretty much unknown in the like nobody ever mentions it in Canadian rifle collecting, but it does have a significant history in that if we had needed to go to war, or we were invaded at that time at the beginning of World War II, this would have been the primary arm that we would have been armed with. So the information that my primary information source is the Defending the Dominion. It's an excellent reference of Canadian military rifles, and I'm just going to show this rifle right here, which I believe is one of the ones that was sent to us. And I'll show you some of the things they didn't modify them in any way, but I'll show you the markings just for this specific rifle. So one of the things that was to be added on our rifles when they came into our service was a red band of 2 inches right behind the first muzzle band, or the first sling swivel, and the 30-06 was to be stamped on this. And they said if war arose and that would be removed. And you don't see this on all of them, but generally it's an easy way to tell if it was a Canadian rifle. It will have this red band, but they don't all necessarily have it. This rifle, also something neat about this rifle is someone's made a hole in the stock, you can see right here, and that's because people removing the bolt, or the firing pin from the Mauser bolt, you need something to push it on, and it looks like they made a convenient little hole to use for the disassembly of the bolt. This gun, I can't tell if by the serial number. I don't have any records of Canadian, the actual serial number range, but this is the markings. It's an Eddystone ball of 1917. The bolt does not match it, and the bolt does have British proofs on it, but the gun has no, I checked underneath the handguards, and there is no British export or import markings on it. So I assume it was a Canadian gun and somehow got a British bolt as a replacement. So that's just some information on what I think is a forgotten weapon from our Canadian military service. And the 1917s are in general just fairly, they've gone up in value quite a bit. This gun, I found it wasn't terribly expensive, but the 1917s have gained popularity, and this gun possibly could have served with the Americans in World War I and then into our service in Canada at the beginning of World War II, which is kind of interesting. So I just thought I would make a video on it. So other than that, thank you for watching.